empezamos a pensar en esto de invitar a grandes referentes de la comunicación.
Nosotros entendemos que nuestros mejores años son los próximos 10.
Patricia in translation has told me today that I need to speak slowly because there are more words in Spanish to cover what I have to say in English. So if it sounds like I'm talking out of a tunnel, I'm just trying to go slowly. 3 years ago in Scotland, I was at a meeting, and at that meeting, I met Diego and Pipe. And as they arrived there, they were just telling me how proud they were that they'd been taking English lessons for the last year in preparation for this meeting. And it was great to know that they were that keen to work and meet with a whole bunch of different people. But it really didn't matter, because once they showed us the work of Notable Publicidad, and we saw how creative the agency was, they didn't need to speak English, because we were so impressed with what they were doing. It was great to have a contact in Uruguay that worked in the same world as we did, and language doesn't become a barrier, because creativity often transcends those things. So when they asked me to come down here to celebrate the 10-year anniversary, I was very proud to come down. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you. I was asked to talk about what's happening in the Canadian marketing place with trends. And just before I do that, I thought I would just tell you briefly who we are. We've been in the market now, there we go. We've been in business now for about 23 years. We started off in one industry. We're now operating in 6 industries. The company started with 5 individuals. They're now 150. And with any agency's growth, as you grow, your services start to grow because your clients are asking more and more from you. And then obviously, as you grow, the types of businesses and the types of brands that you take on grow as well. Today we have operating 3 agencies. One in Toronto that looks after promotions, direct, digital, shopper marketing, and advertising, of which there are 80 people. OSL Montreal that does very similar promotions, advertising, and direct, where there are 30 members. And then about 4 years ago, we launched a different brand name because we were finding that we were running into a lot of conflict. So Toronto, for all its size, is really quite a small country. There's only 30 million people. And I would say about 10 million of them live in the GTA around Toronto, Burlington, Mississauga. And what happens is all of the head offices for marketing are all in the Toronto area. So what happens is if you work on Frito-Lay, sweet snacks, it's very difficult for you to work on, say, Mars, like M&M's, Frito-Lay salty snacks, Mars sweet snacks. So we set up a separate agency with separate creative, and now there's 40 people there, and the business is growing. So OSL has continued to grow even during the downturns. And to give you an idea of the businesses that we work on, some of them are global brands like PepsiCo and Quaker, M&M's, But then there are specific ones to Canada, like banks, like Scotiabank. We work on LG, Bayer, etc. But it's a nice cross-section of packaged goods, financial services, and sort of an all-other category. The 4 trends that I want to address today, and Pipe has asked me to make sure that I do this in half an hour, are the value-driven consumer, owning the data, the speed and the danger of social media, and the power of retail. Let's start with owning the data. The world's changing so quickly that if you think about in the old days when you used to have loyalty cards or key fobs, that when you went to, for example, like fill up with gas at a Shell station and stuff like that, they would collect your data. That world is slowly changing as everything goes digital. The change has gone from, in the old days where retailers would try to own the data and try to own the consumer, and then obviously the creation of loyalty programs like Air Miles, which I'm sure is here as well in Uruguay. But I want to spend a minute talking about the one below that, which is Aeroplan. It is Air Canada's our largest air flight carrier. And they have almost 12 million active members on their loyalty card. And Canadians, probably like most people, but Canadians are obsessive with collecting points, mostly because it gets us out of the freezing cold when we cash in our points and head south for the winter. And slowly, manufacturers are now trying to get into the game of loyalty. And I'm going to give you an example of how that's working right now, because it's become such a turf war of who owns the customer. Because really the customer is being dragged between, is it going to be retailers that own the customer, or is it going to be the brands that own the customer? Not only that, the customer is split. In the old days, it was relatively easy to have name, address, and purchase history. But nowadays, you have access to their followers and their friends and their profiles through Facebook, through Twitter, through friends. So the consumer and owning that consumer is becoming a much more powerful tool. What we did for PepsiCo was to try to create a long-term loyalty program. Now, you all know that creating loyalty, you normally need a fairly high value of your product to invest in loyalty. So what we had to do was come up with a currency that wasn't related to dollars. And the currency that we ended up using was Aeroplan miles using the Air Canada loyalty program. Every single product of Tropicana and Frito-Lay and Quaker and actually Aquafina was in there as well, carried an individual PIN number. And that PIN number was worth X number of points, depending on what the product was. So it became almost transactional that people would go out and we would know which households bought Tropicana, and we could send them incentives to buy Quaker or incentives to stock up on other brands. But the thing was, it was transactional, because every PIN number went to a specific product. So we knew if it was Tropicana 1.89 liter or Tropicana jugs, etc. So this data was very rich. But the trick to the arrangement was we had to negotiate with Air Canada as to who would own the data. And at the end, we, PepsiCo, owned the data for our people. But when this program comes to an end, we need to give that data back to Air Canada. So it's an interesting dilemma for the manufacturer where you invest all this money to build up a program just and to own those consumers, but to find that you eventually have to turn those consumers back again to the original currency. The second one I want to talk about is the value-driven consumer. And what we found in Canada is that the gap between the value buyer and the luxury buyer continues to increase. What's affecting that, obviously, is the economy. And I'm sure it's happening here as well. Where, versus Americans, our confidence continues to remain very high, mostly because our banks weren't able to get into the lending mess that the American banks did with the subprime mortgages. 57% say their personal finances are good to excellent, but they're using any spare cash they have to pay down debt. Because obviously debt has become a scary word. It's become a scary word probably for everybody now. But 30% of Canadians will continue to spend less on clothes. They're going to scale back out-of-home entertainment and dining and consumer packaged good purchases. So we, as agencies and clients, need to find value-added ways to continue to sell our products. And just a quick example for Taco Bell, what they did was we created a program with the launch of the Xbox 360 Halo game. People were lining up outside of stores to pick up Halo. With Taco Bell, they were able to get a head start on some of that stuff. But because the country's so big, we had to create a value system where franchisees across the country could download material in a print-ready format that would allow them to price it specifically for their regions so they could establish the correct value. So all the material, even though it was supported through Facebook and Twitter, etc., the primary driver was the in-store piece, and the in-store piece had to be customized over 150 retailers across the country. Social media. I'm going to give you two examples here. An example that worked well and an example that did not work well at all. It's an interesting sphere because clients are investing heavily in social. And dollars are being moved from traditional advertising to social media. But there's no unknown. The ROI, nobody's got a formula for the ROI. There's no terminology that people use. In mass advertising, we used to talk about reach and frequency and GRPs, and we as agencies could talk to you as marketers. You as marketers could talk to your CEOs and say, well, this is going to be my launch weight, or this is going to be my maintenance weight. And everybody knew what you were talking about. Now, with social media, it's a guess. There's no way that you can talk to each other in a way that your CEOs understand really what you're doing and how is this going to impact your brands and what is going to be the ROI. And the funny thing about social media is that it's cool. You know, it's where's the instruction manual to make it happen? And if I do this in social media, will I become marketer of the year? But then it comes down to the real question is how much will it sell? Or I want a viral campaign. And you just can't make these things happen. So Pepsi created a program in the States and Canada. I don't think it came down here. It was called Pepsi Refresh. They moved away from advertising, which was all about the joy of Pepsi, into creating a program where people could vote on where to send money to do good things. Like you could send it to charities, or you could give computers to schools, or you could repaint something. And all these ideas came in, and Pepsi chose the best ideas and funded the ideas. It was all done